Well, we're at Ergon, we're a consultancy and research organisation, and we've been working for the last 11 years on business and human rights generally. So in many ways, for us, seeing the Modern Slavery Act come in is very welcome, in terms that it actually catalyses trends in relation to human rights due diligence, but also pushes out to a range of sectors that we haven't seen this before. So to start off, I want to say actually it's very, we're sort of generally positive as far as this, and we're seeing with a number of our clients, it's getting to parts of the business that other provisions didn't get to before. That's the good news. Right? So what we've tried to do across a number of sectors, and also building on our work with various clients, both public and private, is to see what's going into modern statements. And what we've been asked by the organisers of this conference is to do a little survey. We've done some analysis more broadly, but specifically on what companies in this sector, so in construction, both in terms of physical construction and supply chain, are saying in their modern slavery statements. And what I want to do is sort of whiz through that, but also to sort of try and draw some questions and conclusions and points of discussion in some ways to go out for the rest of the conference and beyond about what this means. Because in many ways we see the statement as purely one outward focusing, one piece of paper. It's nothing special, right? It's an opportunity, and what's more important is what goes on behind. I know various people like Cindy from ETI will talk to you about what does due diligence really mean as far as this is concerned. And it was good hearing from Ron actually, because I was hoping, and I'm happy that you didn't actually do what I've heard from lots of lawyers, and I speak as a lawyer in long and deep recovery at this point in time, but is simply say, here's the act, here's the things that you should talk about, and here's a draft statement I've prepared for you already. Yeah? And there are a few in the sample, I'll mention them on there. Now, because as we all know, to be compliant with the legislation, you can be compliant by writing this. We don't know anything about modern slavery in our supply chain or business, and we have no intention of finding out. And that will be completely compliant. And certainly in our analysis I'm going to whiz through here, we haven't looked at compliance as the benchmark. We've tried to look at what's good practice and what you can see behind the statement from that good practice. Because for me, I'll give you an example. Nestle, which have just produced a good 40-page modern slavery report, slightly longer than everyone else, you can't find it on their homepage. Now, some people say, well, that's non-compliant. To me, that's nonsense. The importance is actually looking what they say in their statement and what it means and what they're doing. Okay. Now, as far as who's reporting, and I apologise again because probably at the front you can't read this, let alone at the back, but they'll go around. We've looked at 49 modern slavery statements, which were spread across construction companies, construction material companies, and also people who are involved in both. Now, key point to draw out from this that I want to say, and you can look at these later on there, is actually the UK focus. And this was quite surprising compared to other sectors and broader sectors we've looked at. The majority of the statements have really focused on their UK operations or how they touch the UK. And looking at a number of global companies, I'll come back to this, you can actually see a bit of the dead hand of the lawyers here. Because if you're a global company, and some of you are in the room, is that you say, okay, everybody knows you're in the Middle East. You know you're in the Middle East, but if you say we're only reporting for the UK PLC about the UK PLC, in many ways you're hiding behind the legislation strictly, not to do something which actually could be for your benefit, both in terms of investors, business to business, and civil society more widely. I'll come back to it. So as far as the foreign-based companies are concerned, again, they've not reported on their global operations or supply chain. They've focused on the UK, which again, this was a surprise for this sector compared to other sectors. If you look at food, if you look at garments, if you look at the broad ETI membership, I'll look, Cindy, I think we can nod and say they report broadly about everything because the world knows that you operate outside the UK. Okay? As far as what's being covered in the statement, probably the easiest point to this, and this kind of maps the issues that are in the guidance and legislation, is the more darker blue on the right-hand side, the more detail. That's the easiest way to say there. So most people report in moderate or reasonable detail as far as organisation and structure and policy. Now that's fine, because anyone can have a policy. Now, policy isn't difficult. Implementing policy is where the action starts on this concern. But very, very few of the sample report on their risk assessment and actions in response to risk assessments, which again, it may be the next year is the year when, as far as this sector, or the year afterwards, because we expect incremental change, that people start reporting on that level of understanding their risk and responding to it. Yeah. As far as 5 companies, and this is always an interesting point on here, they used very similar, I could say nearly identical phrasing, yeah, as far as it's concerned, in relation to their due diligence section in something which otherwise had no substance. Now, when you look through these, and you look through these statements, and if you are relying on external parties to draft your statement for you, I mean, we help companies, but we never draft their statements. If you're asking lawyers to do this, just remember, if they are identical to one of your competitors or someone else in another sector, someone might see this. And it doesn't always look so great, because the issue which simply says this, and we've seen a lot of statements, some in this sector, but more broadly, that say we have absolute zero tolerance of forced labour in our business and our supply chain. We have the following policies, and we can commit, back to your point, Ron, there is no forced labour in our supply chain. Do you know what? To me, that's not a lot better than the one I gave you at the start, saying we're not interested and we don't care. Because at least in that first example, you know what the company really thinks about this. Yeah. So I think the good statements, and I'm going to come through to those in a moment here. This is a map which, actually, given time, I'm not going to go through simply because you can't read it. But this gives you an indication of some of the geographical areas that are called out as far as the companies in the sample is concerned. And there are very few. If you can read on those at the front, the number in the Middle East is 1 company calls out that there is actually potential risk, let alone action, as far as modern slavery is concerned there. Now, if we look at this as far as where the areas of risks are and what people are saying, there are a number of companies that have called out specific materials, 1 or 2. There are 2 construction companies that we looked in the sample that call out that they work in the Middle East and the Gulf. And I speak of, we've been working on a big project in the Gulf all summer up to this point. And do you know, if you're doing construction in the Middle East and the Gulf, you have a forced labour risk. And everybody in this room knows this, and the general public knows this. So to me, it's actually quite surprising, and I'm being direct on this, if in a modern slavery statement, you don't say that. Because if you look at some of the, for example, take Marks and Spencer's modern slavery statement, they call out the risk and they say, we don't know, we have risk we need to work better on. Now, I understand the issue that we think on a number of statements, what may happen and does happen seeing this is that if you want to put that forward, once you get to your lawyers and you get to your corporate comms people, it's not really a good look, and you may get pushback on that, and it may take you time. Similarly, with one client we have, which is a luxury brand, they wrote a very good statement that then they went to their web design team for a super swanky web page on there and said, oh, we need a little bit of real estate on the front page. And they said, not that sure, what words do you want? And they said, modern slavery. Now, from a comms perspective or a legal perspective, there may be things that stop you disclosing. But I think my point on this, what was surprising for this, if the whole world knows that you operate in a risk area, where's the danger in actually being honest about that? So we were surprised on the level of that. Now, as far as good practice, and we'll call out specifically, as far as the sample is concerned, to be honest, Marshall's modern slavery statement stood head and shoulders above everybody else's. And I think why it did that, 1, it was longer, and that's actually quite a good proxy sometimes. But 2 is it identified how they did their risk assessment, where the areas of risk were, and what they were doing about it and who they were collaborating with. Now, it didn't mean that they disclosed lots of potentially confidential or harmful information to the company. But I think, as an example, I think it's a good one to say that the more people that disclose on this, the more likely that we can actually have some sort of actually understanding. And to take a point as far as what's in the modern slavery statement in other sectors we see, is that if we're all talking a lot about pre-competitive space and pre-competitive behaviour, the more common information on difficult criminal issues like modern slavery we can all help put in the public domain through these statements, the easier it is to collaborate and the less difficult it would be. And I take Nestle as an example. A big step for Nestle on child and forced labour 2 years ago was actually to say, yes, we do have child labour in our supply chain. And in many ways, as far as actually restrictions on them, there was a break then. They could start operating more effectively. And I think the same applies across general sectors there. Now, as far as how the sector compares, I think it's fair to say, as far as actually retail brands and food brands, they've got longer exposure to these issues. They've got more public exposure. They've got more in terms of business to business, and also as far as civil society asking them to do things and more collaboration. It's not surprising that compared to this sector, they're further ahead in the way that they're disclosing and operating on modern slavery. And I know you'll hear from ETI and David from Stronger Together about work that's developed originally in those sectors there. They've also got more collaborative processes, and they have, and we'll hear more about this, they have a common standard, or more than one common standard in some ways, but they have things that they can operate together on this, and I think that makes a difference. Yeah? Key things as far as going forward, I think one is that it is a real catalyst, and the main reason is you've got to go to the board and talk to the board, and let's not underestimate how important that is. And also, I think, picking up on Ron's point, it's a real opportunity, and the opportunity is there, and companies that do this well are the companies who see this as not as a modern slavery on its standalone issue, but as a way to get into the broader human rights issues, whether that's through ethical trading, whether it's through issues on land rights, on construction as well. We've seen this. That's the way to go through. And finally, I think there's a room for collaboration here, and without collaboration, then it's really a dead-end street. And I think lots of those companies who report very poorly are the ones who are not going to collaborate ever in any sense at all.